This is the Tactical Intellectual Retrieval channel. Welcome to the platform. The video presentation today is definitely part of the Massacre series, Reconstruction Era. Of course, you see the dates right there on that slide. Now, the topic will specifically deal with White League and Klan terrorism from that period on to, let's say, the 60s or 1960s when the Civil Rights Campaign was in full effect. Now, this is a combination of funny and interesting to me. Like when I get on YouTube and say I'm looking at something like a GSP or the Florida State Patrol or any other patrol, and they're doing a car chase and the person that's fleeing is maybe a melanated person in a melanated city, or I'm looking at some crime segment on the news and the city is like the inner city and they probably got somebody who's a melanated person doing crime. You will see this claim right here. There's a new one here, 13%/52 or 13/90, signifying that your population number is 13%. You're either 52 or 90% of the crime, all violent crimes in the US. You know, they can't even agree on that. So you know that it's a little bit of propaganda and just retardation and foolishness from these people. Now, I have the usual suspects in quotes there. Now, this is very ironic and it's very much projection personified when it comes to these people, because what we're about to delve into, the White Leagues and Klan and other race-based terrorist organizations from back in the day who raped, robbed, murdered, just pillaged, just other unscrupulous activities. And they've done that a lot. So we're going to get into it. And like I say, they're really the usual suspects when it comes to all of these things right there. And I don't know how this became attached to us, because when you look at the timeline, I mean, our people was doing well or attempting to do well, whereas you had other groups coming from Europe, the Palito contingent. They had gangs and they were the ones who were murdering, committing crimes regularly and everything. You know, our people had businesses set up, destroyed, and then set up and destroyed. And you'll see that right here. So how did this connotation of being the usual suspects when it comes to violent crime stick to us? You know, in our modern day, you see something that kind of echoes the past. You know, we know Trump, he had exonerated or pardoned all of those rioters that were storming the Capitol, and he actually gave Ashley Babbitt's estate $30 million. Come on now. It's funny, man. Like Amazing Lucas say, they reward their criminals, you know. But let's go ahead and jump into it and get some info on the White League terrorist. We already know about the Klan terrorist and everything, but let's go ahead and jumpstart this thing. Now, I have this 64 Parishes article, White League, and it's by Justin A. Nystrom, and I will leave a link to it in the description, of course. That's the civilized thing to do. Now, right under White League, the title, it says, a paramilitary organization aligned with the Democratic Party. The White League played a central role in the overthrow of Republican rule and intimidation of African Americans in Louisiana during Reconstruction. And as you see by Thomas Nast, this image here on the right side, you have the KKK member, and he's shaking hands with this person who's has his face turned the opposite direction. He's the White League member. And then it says the Union as it was, and then of course worse than slavery, and then you know the imagery of them oppressing, brutalizing, just intimidating by any means necessary the melanated FBA folk in those times. All right, so I'm gonna just go ahead and read it. I'll definitely do something on this image of the White League here, the Union as it was, and this is from 1874. I'll do something later on it just to break down the imagery, the little Easter egg, so to speak. of what everything it means. So I'm gonna go ahead and start right here. It says, a paramilitary organization aligned with the Democratic Party. The White League played a central role in the overthrow of Republican rule and intimidation of African Americans in Louisiana during Reconstruction. Although calls for a white man's party had been heard in Louisiana ever since black men gained the franchise in 1868, they grew numerous in the tumultuous postbellum years of Union occupation in the 1870s. As Northern carpetbaggers arrived in the state, they came to dominate the Republican Party, which espoused voter registration and civil rights for formerly enslaved people and other African Americans. The contested gubernatorial election of 1872, in which the Republican William Pitt Kellogg prevailed over his fusionist opponent John McHenry, coincided with the first of a series of cases in which black plaintiffs successfully sued white Louisianans who had violated civil rights and public accommodation statutes. These black victories in Republican-controlled civil courtrooms fueled fear among white voters and created an atmosphere receptive to the use of white supremacist rhetoric for creating a unified conservative opposition to Republican rule. The defection of white voters from the Republican Party during and immediately following the election of 1872 was a related byproduct of this dynamic and contributed heavily to the racial polarization of politics in Louisiana. A mobilization of white supremacists. We will probably never know who coined the term White League, but its phraseology surely resonated with white Louisianans of the postbellum generation. The name evoked bitter recollections of the Union or loyal leagues that sprouted in Louisiana and elsewhere across the South in the wake of General Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox. The 19th century was an era in which politically active men belonged to one or more clubs of a political nature. Seeking to forge a constituency among recently enfranchised black men, Republicans appealed first to black veterans and later to freedmen and formed this constituency into local clubs or leagues. These union and loyal leagues served as a mechanism for inculcating black voters into this important aspect of American political life, while at the same time broadcasting Republican rhetoric to a receptive audience. A substantial plurality of white Southerners looked upon these organizations as anathema. The first articulation of a white league emerged during a meeting at the St. Landry Parish Courthouse in Opelousas in late April 1874. While planning for the upcoming political season of nominations and elections, the St. Landry Democrats also called for the formation of a political movement grounded in the foundations of white supremacy. Giving it the name White League, the committee printed its proclamations in the Opelousas Courier the next day, setting into motion a chain reaction that fostered the formation of similar clubs in neighboring parishes. The White League spread quickly throughout Acadiana in late spring and reached New Orleans by late June. Thus, from one standpoint, the White League emerged as part of the political culture of late 19th century America, albeit in a campaign to restore white supremacy through political means. In rural Louisiana, as well as in cities like New Orleans, many parish and ward conservative or democratic clubs simply renamed their organizations from something like the Fifth Ward Democratic Club to the Fifth Ward White League. Alright guys, you have to excuse my mispronunciation of Appomattox. I think I said Appomattox, but that's what happens when you kind of learn several different languages. It kind of bleeds over into your English. So let's go ahead and go into the next subheading. Transition to paramilitary organization. The White League quickly migrated from being a political organization to taking on a paramilitary identity and structure. Its leaders were captains and lieutenants, and membership also held rank such as first sergeant or private. This was both a reflection of the broad influence of Confederate veterans in the organization, but it also betrayed a growing militarization of politics and the role that violence and intimidation had played in determining political outcomes since the start of the Civil War. In this regard, while the League attracted earnest individuals who embraced it as part of the political process, the emphasis on militarism also attracted a violent element that thirsted for the blood of Republicans. The degree to which a white league would pursue the violent intimidation tactics one normally associated with the Ku Klux Klan hinged entirely upon the sort of men who dominated a locality's club. Unlike the Democratic Party, the White League had no statewide platform, and individual chapters had unique characteristics, often dwelling upon issues of a local nature and even serving as a vehicle for individuals seeking redress for old personal animosities. The militarized nature of the White League reached its most mature form in New Orleans, where the League was best organized and by far the largest. Capably led by veteran Confederate officers, the League in the metropolis attracted considerable support from the rising generation of native-born white men who had been too young to fight in the Civil War and who hungered both for manly adventure and a chance to reclaim political control over Louisiana. The Crescent City White League purchased large quantities of arms and ammunition and drilled its members throughout the summer of 1874. By September, it resembled more closely an army than it did the aggregation of political clubs from which it grew. This was no accident. For the objectives of the League had shifted away from merely showing force to support of the coming November midterm elections to a possible violent overthrow of Louisiana's Republican government. Reconstruction violence. While there are many hazily documented references to White League activity during Reconstruction, two particularly violent episodes in Louisiana can be clearly attributed to the direct efforts of White League clubs. In late August 1874, elements from an unruly White League chapter murdered 6 white and 4 black Republicans in Red River Parish during a multi-day episode known as the Coshata Massacre. While politics served as the premise for conflict, local animosities and individual bloodlust fueled the deeds of its actors. 2 weeks later, on September 14, 1874, thousands of men fought each other in the streets of New Orleans when the Crescent City White League made a failed strategic bid to overthrow the state government in a clash popularly dubbed the Battle of Liberty Place. While more than 30 people died in the battle, it was fought largely between armed combatants who had clear political outcomes in mind. Indeed, the leadership of the Crescent City White League feared that the sort of murderous outrages perpetrated at Coshata would undermine their efforts to cast themselves as a wronged people rising in popular rebellion. While the origin, scope, and objective of these two actions differed greatly, both encapsulated an essential truth about Reconstruction in Louisiana. By the summer of 1874, not only were Republicans unable to protect their constituency, they could not protect themselves. The League had been prevented from overtaking the state only by the presence of federal troops, whom they carefully avoided provoking. What was doubtlessly even more discouraging to Louisiana's Republicans was that a growing number of editors in the national press now supported the White League efforts to obtain what it termed as home rule. So now let's drop down to the subheading entitled Legacy, and it reads, "The White League last appeared as a force during the chaotic weeks leading up to the Compromise of 1877. Supporting the government of Francis T. Nichols, the League patrolled the streets of New Orleans and secured the Supreme Court of Louisiana, then housed in the Cabildo on Jackson Square. When Nichols took office later that year, the League dissolved as a political body but was in large part recast as the nucleus of a new Louisiana National Guard. That individuals join the White League for so many different reasons makes easy characterization of its legacy a complex task. Yet, perhaps the White League's most influential legacy was that its memory, both real and imagined, would serve as a model for successive generations' efforts at maintaining white supremacy through the rhetoric of fear." Again, this 64 parishes article entitled White League is by the author Justin A. Nystrom. It's pretty good. This was a good write-up by him, and it's very informative no matter what race that you, I want to say, fall under or categorize yourself as. There's definitely a takeaway for everyone. Now, speaking of takeaway, here's my takeaway on this article. Now, underneath this subheading, a mobilization of white supremacists, when you go down to where it says seeking to forge a constituency among recently enfranchised black men, Republicans appealed first to black veterans and later to freedmen and formed this constituency into local clubs or leagues. Now, you can see this is organization right here, or organizations. And then it says these union and loyal leagues served as a mechanism for inculcating black voters into this important aspect of American political life, while at the same time broadcasting Republican rhetoric to a receptive audience. A substantial plurality of white Southerners looked upon these organizations as anathema. So that's a deep loathing right there. So my thoughts are organizations and organization period is something that they both strongly feared and loathed. So this platform deals with history, and sometimes we get people who just come up and say something crazy like the past. Why you deal with the past? I live in the now. Past ain't important. You stuck in the past. Well, tell that to the doctor that asks for your medical history report so he can make a proper diagnosis. When you want to go to a restaurant or on vacation, you tend to check out the reviews, right? Okay, those are past events and past experiences that you're looking at to make a present day or future determination. It's no different in history. So it's no secret that these movements in the past is a playbook or guide for the present day counterparts or somebody that's want to implement something into the future. They draw from that naturally. So looking at the article again, it's saying that the white leagues emerged as part of the political culture of late 19th century America, albeit in a campaign to restore white supremacy through what? Political means. Okay, so they start off with a political group or aim to delve into politics before veering off into what? Violence. So that takes me into transition to paramilitary organization. Now, I'm not saying anything that's too complex. I'm not speaking so high over someone's head that they can't comprehend. These are obvious parallels that I'm just bringing out. The past and the present, everything matches up. So it's the violent group identity that seems to attract the young and dumb, on top of being delusional, of course, to be bold enough to act on the violent thoughts that's in their minds. They want a sense of adventure. That's one thing that these articles bring out. Now, under a transition to a paramilitary organization, what does it say here? It says that a growing militarization of politics and the role that violence and intimidation had played in determining political outcomes since the start of the Civil War. The League attracted earnest individuals who embraced it as part of the political process. The emphasis on militarism also attracted a violent element that thirsted for the blood of Republicans. Hence why I say the young and dumb on top of being delusional. So just as those groups back then attracted the political minded and those craving or having a bloodlust, the modern day iterations of these white leagues are equipped with that mentality on top of having better weapons and technology. And as you can see, it also depends on the person when it comes to how likely they are to act violently. You know, it pays to gauge their level of animosity towards fill in the blank they expose of themselves naturally, just as this article brought out. Here's a point that I have to read straight from the article itself. Now, it's speaking of the league, but let's just say leagues. It says that the league in Pick a City attracted considerable support from the rising generation of native-born white men who had been too young to fight in the Civil War and who hungered both for manly adventure and a chance to reclaim political control over, it says Louisiana here, but it was all over the South and the southern areas of the North, like southern Illinois and Missouri and parts of Indiana, of course Maryland, probably bled up into Delaware too. But anyway, looking back at the article, it says that for the objectives of the league had shifted away from merely showing force in support of the coming November midterm elections to a possible violent overthrow of Louisiana's Republican government. That's something that's parallels all right there. The MAGA people, they would fit right in, possibly. They're a little bit softer than the people back then, but for the most part, they'll fit right in. Now, as far as these movements, you can definitely see the point that these young ones, these young adventure-seeking, bloodlusted people, they have a tendency to join. Present day and definitely in the past. So with me personally, I don't care about their hatred of whoever. We can, definitely monitor that. It's that insatiable urge for violence that's the problem. We read about it in the past and we see it in the present day. Now, under the Reconstruction Violence subheading, it mentions these two violent events and how unruly white league members acted out violently in the form of murder, of course. Would you expect anything less? Well, they tend to cave in to their bloodlust and they develop an urge to conquer something. Now, there are many racial movements around the world in our day, and there are clear parallels that can be made naturally from the Reconstruction period to our present day. And one thing you have to realize is that the people in the present day, these are the grandchildren or great grandchildren of these people, and in some instances it may be the children or child of one of these white league rednecks. Now, on my Tactical Intellectual HRT channel, I give info on the Nyan people, and you can see that these white league people are certainly upholding that murderous tradition that you read about. Talk about usual suspects, huh? So this subheading, Reconstruction Violence, have some bangers. It has some gems in it. Now, it mentioned that the white league leadership, they feared that the murderous exploits of its members would sort of undermine their cause, in quotes, which is painting themselves as noble victims just trying to protect themselves and way of life, which is ridiculous in and of itself. Now, the last point under this subheading is something that, we have to draw parallels and link things together. Now, a growing number of the editors in the national press, they sympathize with the efforts of the white leagues. They termed it home rule, and they started creating strong propaganda, and it became the propaganda arm of these people. So again, parallels can be drawn in present times with the media, even a sitting president speaking on neo-Nazis and skinheads and stuff. They're all good people. There's some good people there, but he said something similar to that. Now, the last point I want to make is that these white leagues, they dissolved their leagues and infiltrated sections of municipalities, man. That means, law enforcement, being lawmakers, or on the surface an unassuming productive member of society. Now, we know better than that. Now, the last point I want to make is the article brings out how these people, they would serve as a model for successive generations' efforts at maintaining the also diluted idea of Palito or white supremacy. Now, how do they do that? How will we know? Well, it's the rhetoric they use that pushes fear. These people, they definitely are, how can I say it, want to be victims. They're deluded, man. That's all I know. They're deluded people. And just know you're not living in the past when you go back and look at trends that happened already that we're falling prey or falling victim to in present times. It's important to know so you can diagnose and know how to conquer it. I thought this was a really good article, very informative, something that the youngins, the YNs can check out and look at and add some knowledge to themselves. I say that respectfully, instead of banging against one another, bang against these present day white leaguers. Do something positive and prevent another Dylan Roof from popping up. Now, at the start of the video, I shared with you guys some rhetoric that is meant to be disparaging and demeaning and has implications that a segment of this population in the US is pretty much undeserving of anything. Now, here's a video that I want to play and share with you guys. Now, it's relevant because the backdrop is a descendant of settler colonialism from Kenya back in those days. I want to let you guys know what his mentality was. And you can apply this mentality all around the world where there's an interaction between melanated original people and the Palito settlers or Palito population. Now, melanated people have always had a suspicion that they felt this way because they've never voiced it to us. But check this video out here.
One of the things in warfare, you try to denigrate the enemy. You remember in Rwanda, they talked about the enemy as cockroaches. Do you remember that? To try and make it that if you killed them, it wasn't an issue. You're just, where's the aerosol can? You're just spraying cockroaches. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what I do remember as a child is that they produced horror books. So you would get a publication of 10 or 15 pages, quite big, with nothing but atrocities of people that have been chopped up by the Mau. So people, heads cut off, animals, legs cut off, children murdered in their beds, and this was thrown at us.
Now, that's one thing that you have to really understand, that all that denigration and disparagement, that's an act of warfare, just to ease the minds of the masses that if you got rid of these people, it's not a big deal, as the older man brought out. Now, all of that is deeply rooted in acrimony. They're feeling acrimonious for, in their mind, whatever reason, but we already know is due to insecurity, deep-seated insecurity. Now, this takes us back to the introduction when I showcased these crime stats. Now, we definitely have to showcase the truth on that, because one thing you have to realize is the people that, I guess, purport that 15 or 13% equals 54 or 13 equals 92%. These people are stat stupid or stupid on stats. They don't know what they're reading, or they're misreading into stats. They're implying that, okay, the arrest rate for murder is in actuality. Whereas the truth is that, okay, they're not even looking at convictions. And even then, when you look at convictions, you have to look at the wrongful convictions. And that's a high rate right there amongst that, either 13 or 15%, which is the black population, quote unquote, black or melanated population. Okay, these people are stat stupid, you know, and it's rooted again in that insecurity. They are, what that old man is saying, they're denigrating and disparaging a population because they want to, when they make their move, they want to make it seem like it's insignificant, minuscule. So that's one thing you have to look out for, this act of war. So all in all, yeah, it does rub me the wrong way when you have the descendants of these savage, murderous, profligate liars throwing shots at my group in the modern day. So the way I see it is that melanated people in the modern day, we have a position that we've been kind of pushed into, and that's to kind of be like truth tellers, definitely investigators. We have to have that mentality right there where we just delve into things and present, investigate and present. So that's what this massacre series will be about. We're gonna juxtapose some things because people really do have a short memory. So I'll end it here and appreciate the view.